you're going to upload a whole bunch of your own company documents, do you lose any rights to them? That would look like a license grant that gives the vendor unfettered rights to do whatever it wants to with your data and your input, your content. In this episode, we're going to talk about vetting AI tools for your business, in particular looking at what your AI vendors or other vendors and service providers can do with your data. We're going to be talking about what considerations you should pay attention to when choosing AI tools or AI providers, and then separately, when you have other service providers like your outside counsel or your external audit or accounting firm or anybody that you outsource processes to. We're going to talk about what obligations to impose on service providers when they use your data in AI tools that they've got just to help them with their own productivity and inner work. What should legal and IT ask before signing on with an AI provider or signing up for an AI tool? The security review and the privacy review of an AI tool is a little bit complicated. It may be the responsibility of your IT or InfoSec department. You may not have the sufficient expertise internally to properly evaluate the two. And think about it in three different buckets. There's large AI engine providers like OpenAI, Anthropic, Microsoft, and then there are smaller AI vendors that have specialized services, which might be a new spreadsheet app or a new receipt management for reimbursements. It would be a tool that's not provided by one of the massive providers who have sort of the imprimatur of a multi-billion-dollar company, but they will have AI services that you may want to use. And then third is anyone helping you with custom AI development. So if you're trying to build tools in-house for your own use or for your customers, that's a different fact pattern than the first two. What questions should you ask from a security and privacy perspective? These are going to be the same questions that you ask for any other third-party vendor management situation, but you need to potentially ask second layers of questions. So you don't want to rely on just current policies that the vendors tell you about in terms of how they handle your data and how they protect your data, but probe a little bit to see how much they really have adjusted for AI specifically. From a legal perspective, we're going to talk about provisions in a contract that you want to pay attention to when you're engaging an AI vendor. In addition to what should the contract language say, you'll also want to ask enough questions that you can ensure you're comfortable that the provider is really doing what they say they do. So a contract may say, we have perfect security. That's useless unless the company actually has really good security. And of course, there's no perfect security. So that would be a red flag. But the first thing we want to talk about and look at is who owns data. In AI, there's confusion with terminology of uploads, prompts, responses, documents generated, Gen AI content. So we're going to simplify into two categories of data for the purposes of our discussion. First is input. By that, I'm referring to anything you type into a prompt, documents that you upload or provide access to for the AI tool to do its function. And then output, we will use to refer to documents created, images created, responses to your prompts. So who owns the input and who owns the output? Who's allowed to do what with the input? Who's allowed to do what with output? Intellectual property is going to be the first section of a contract you'll want to look at. So the license grant and or intellectual property, and see what license are you, the customer, giving your provider in your own input. So if you're going to upload a whole bunch of your own company documents, do you lose any rights to them? That would look like a license grant that gives the vendor unfettered rights to do whatever it wants to with your data and your input, your content. Second, the output that is generated. Are you allowed to use it? Do you have a license to use output for anything you want? Can you use it for commercial purposes? You want the contract to promise to you that any content given to you in output is free from copyright restrictions or any other violations of laws or contracts. Next, you want to look at use. What are the specific use restrictions imposed on the vendor with your input and also on the output? So I recommend starting with the most strict position and then using your own judgment to adjust accordingly for each specific deal or tool. So The first premise should be an AI vendor cannot use your input for anything other than performing the services under the contract for you. That's best case scenario. It's likely there will also be clauses that permit them to give access to their third-party vendors or subcontractors or sub-processors. Ideally, that is also solely for the purpose of providing you the services under the contract, which just means making the AI tool work as it's intended to work. You want to look for phrases like the vendor or its subprocessors can use your content to, quote, improve the product, or certainly for marketing. Those are both yellow flags, not red flags, because they could be okay, and you may not have a choice. You may just have to do that. But think through, what does that mean they're really going to do? If a vendor is using your content and your output for marketing purposes, that's almost any purpose they can possibly think of. Same goes with improving a tool. So you'll want to make sure, at least if they have those rights, that there's no right to monetize it, no right to provide it to third parties as is, or at least for it to be de-identified if it's personal information or aggregated with other information. And then you also need to look at the typical contract provisions that you'd look at for a SaaS product, but think about them in the context of AI. So that means checking security and privacy. What are the reps and warranties? What are the carve-outs? Limitation of liability. What's the liability cap? What's the indemnification obligation? And how are both parties expected to protect confidential information? In each of those situations, you want to make sure the language is tailored to AI so that you make sure that you're covered. When you're about to engage an AI vendor, use an AI product, or have a service provider who uses it, you want to make sure that their license to your input is limited, that their ability to share with third parties is also limited, that you have the rights to use your output for whatever you need to use it for, including if you're going to use it for commercial purposes. And you want to make sure the vendor isn't disclaiming too much. Finally, one thing that we recommend you require vendors to do is only use tools that they have vetted. So you're going to ask, ideally contractually, your third-party vendors to only use reputable AI tools that they have vetted. You may ask them to verify the security controls, even though that's not likely possible. And you want to impose on them the obligation to continually evaluate the AI tools they're using, because we know things change rapidly. Even configuring whether or not you can delete files or delete your own input or output, that can change on a weekly basis in certain AI tools. So make sure your vendor is agreeing to do that they'll be transparent with you and tell you when they're using AI, and then that they have their own internal policies to make sure your data is going to be safe, your content, your input, and your output. Governance involves being educated to make the right decisions for your organization about what tools to use, appropriate data types, and appropriate use cases. Then establish some processes that allow the organization and your staff, your employees, your users to continually propose new data types, use cases, tools, and evaluate and make risk-based decisions about what's okay in your organization. You need to make sure you understand all of the laws that apply to you and know that tailored training is essential to make AI governance work in practice. Thanks for listening to another episode of Decoding Cyber Law. If you've got questions, check out the show notes, go to our website, or feel free to message me on LinkedIn.